So, welcome to the deep dive. I'm really glad you're joining us today because our mission here is to completely transform how you view the actual practice of law.
Yeah, we are going to unpack a structural discipline today that basically determines whether your legal matter succeeds or just completely falls apart.
Exactly. But before we get into the theory, I want to set the scene. I want you to imagine a multi-million-dollar M&A deal.
Oh, the classic high-stakes scenario.
Right. And you've got endless nights. You've got literal gallons of coffee. You have teams of associates who have just been working through the weekends for months.
Sleeping under their desks, probably.
Pretty much. So the due diligence is completely finalized.
Mhm.
The purchase price is locked in. The transaction documents are, in near final form.
Everyone is basically getting ready to pop the champagne at this point.
Exactly. And then, exactly 3 days before the signing ceremony, the opposing counsel receives a letter.
Oof. The devastating 11th hour arrival. I mean, it is literally never good news when that happens.
Never. So this letter is from a minority shareholder. And this is a stakeholder that, until this exact moment, neither the buyer's team nor the seller's primary counsel had ever even been formally introduced to.
Which is wild. They just weren't in the data room at all.
Nope, not in the data room. They weren't in any of the primary cap table discussions. And yet, this completely unknown entity holds blocking rights over the entire transaction.
Wow.
Yeah, it was all buried under some obscure legacy shareholders agreement.
Which means the entire structural integrity of the deal just collapsed in an instant. I mean, the fallout from a surprise of that magnitude, it's never contained to just, like, a minor renegotiation.
Yeah, it's a massive disaster.
Right. Our source material maps out the exact anatomy of this kind of failure. So first, the closing is delayed by 6 weeks. And in the M&A world, 6 weeks is an absolute eternity.
Because everything shifts, right?
Exactly. Market conditions fluctuate, interest rates shift, debt financing terms expire. I mean, total panic sets in. And second, the legal fees just skyrocket.
Well, yeah, because now you have premium billing teams scrambling in total crisis mode.
Right, trying to untangle a knot that honestly shouldn't have been tied in the first place.
And then there's the third consequence, which is probably the worst one. It's the complete deterioration of the commercial relationship.
Oh, the trust is just gone.
Completely gone. You have two parties who spent months building all this goodwill, projecting this unified vision for a merger, and suddenly they are looking across the table with total suspicion.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the immediate instinct in the room is always to start pointing fingers. People start screaming about legal malpractice.
Oh, for sure. They want to fire the junior associates who ran the data room.
Or blame the opposing counsel for hiding the ball. But the source material makes a really crucial and honestly kind of uncomfortable point right here.
Which is what?
Every single element of the traditional legal work might have actually been executed with complete competence.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The contracts might have been flawlessly drafted. The indemnities could have been ironclad. The failure actually wasn't a lack of technical legal expertise.
Ah, I see. It was a failure in stakeholder identification.
Exactly. The lawyers were so hyper-focused on the people sitting directly across the negotiation table that they completely failed to map the entire ecosystem of the deal.
They missed someone who had both an interest in and influence over the outcome.
Right. And by the time this hidden shareholder finally materialized, the window for proactive management was just completely gone. You aren't lawyering anymore at that point.
You're just doing emergency public relations.
Yeah, just pure damage control. And this brings us to the fundamental paradigm shift we are unpacking today.
Right. We are looking at the comprehensive guide to stakeholder management in legal matters. And this is specifically through the framework developed by the ILPM, the International Institute of Legal Project Management.
The core premise here is really important. Stakeholder management is absolutely not a soft skill. It is not a relationship nicety.
It's not about remembering your client's birthday.
Exactly, or taking them out to a nice dinner. It is a rigorous structural discipline. It's a hard methodology that literally dictates whether a legal matter succeeds or spirals into total chaos.
So to start, we really need to fundamentally redefine the vocabulary we are using, especially the word stakeholder itself.
Yeah, because if you poll 100 practicing attorneys right now and ask them to identify their stakeholders on a given file, 95 of them are going to point to one person.
The entity that signed the engagement letter.
Exactly. They view the client who pays the invoices as the sole stakeholder.
But treating a legal matter like the only person who matters is the one paying the bill? It's like planning an incredibly complex, high-stakes wedding and only sending an invitation to the bride and groom.
That is a great analogy. You've secured the central figures, but you've ignored the entire operational apparatus required to actually execute the event.
Right. You haven't mapped the venue coordinator who controls the lighting. You haven't mapped the caterer who controls the timeline.
Or the local municipality that controls the noise ordinance.
Exactly. Or, the incredibly litigious neighbor who will absolutely call the police and shut the entire production down at 9 p.m. if they feel disrespected.
If your stakeholder map only contains the bride and groom, you don't actually have a strategic map. You just have a billing contact list.
So what's the actual definition we should be using?
Well, the ILPM framework provides a much more expansive and, frankly, a much more dangerous definition. A stakeholder is defined as any individual, group, or organization who can affect or be affected by a legal process or its outcome.
Affect or be affected by. I mean, that dramatically expands the blast radius of any legal work.
He really does. It is a bi-directional relationship. It's not just about who has power over you, but who actually feels the impact of your actions.
Let's ground this in reality for you listening. If we take a standard corporate transaction, say like a mid-market acquisition of a manufacturing plant, who actually falls into that net?
The web is massive once you apply that specific definition. I mean, obviously, you have the board of directors and the executive team.
Sure, usual suspects.
But you also have silent shareholders and minority investors, like the one who blew up our introductory scenario. You have regulatory bodies overseeing antitrust or environmental compliance.
Right, and what about the financiers?
Oh, absolutely. You have the debt financiers who hold covenants over the target company's assets. You have affected employees who are terrified of redundancy, union representatives.
Yeah, it just keeps going.
It does. Counterparties to existing commercial contracts who hold consent rights, and in many cases, you even have the end-use customers who might defect if they fear a drop in quality post-acquisition.
That is a staggering amount of people to keep track of.
Yeah.
And if we pivot to litigation, it's obviously a different cast of characters, but it's an equally complex web.
Oh, totally. In litigation, the map includes the opposing party and their counsel, naturally, but it also heavily features the insurers.
Insurers are a huge one.
Yeah, they have immense, often completely unrecognized power over settlement dynamics. Then you have the fact that witnesses, the expert witnesses, third parties, who are subject to discovery subpoenas.
Even judicial clerks managing the docket, right?
Exactly. And in high-profile or public interest cases, you have to include the media and the broader public.
Okay, I have to challenge this, though, just from the perspective of a practicing lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
The legal industry is already notorious for burnout.
True.
We have associates billing 80-hour weeks just to keep up with the technical drafting and, the discovery review.
Yeah, they're already stretched thin.
Right. So if I walk into a partner's office and say, hey, before we draft this merger agreement, we need to spend 20 hours mapping out the feelings of the local union rep and the counterparty vendors, I ain't going to get laughed right out of the room.
You definitely are.
It just feels like an invitation to drown in administrative busywork.
That is the standard industry pushback, 100%.
Yeah.
And it usually stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of risk allocation.
How?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the framework doesn't demand that you give equal attention to the union rep and the CEO. It demands that you identify them so you can calibrate your attention strategically.
Okay. So it's about prioritization.
Exactly. We have to look at the mathematics of this investment.
Right.
What consumes more billable time and client capital? Spending 10 hours at the inception of a matter systematically identifying structural vulnerabilities, or spending hundreds of hours in crisis management later.
When a hidden vendor terminates a critical supply contract because they weren't notified of a change of control.
Exactly.
So the upfront mapping is essentially an insurance policy against catastrophic delays.
Yeah.
You're spending a little bit of time now to buy certainty later.
Yes. When you assemble your stakeholder list reactively, meaning you only engage with third parties when they suddenly pop up to block your path, you are permanently on the back foot.
You completely surrender control of the legal timeline to outside forces.
Right. And the ILLPM methodology is entirely about retaining that control.
Okay, so let's break down the actual mechanics of how you retain that control. The source material outlines a foundational three-step framework: identify, analyze, engage.
It sounds deceptively simple, but the tactical execution requires a lot of discipline.
Let's start with step one: identify. The source refers to this as the crucial foundation, but also the most chronically underinvested phase in all of legal practice.
The absolute non-negotiable rule of the identification phase is the timing imperative. This comprehensive, exhaustive list must be generated before any substantive legal work commences.
You cannot start drafting clauses or filing motions and just hope to figure out the stakeholders along the way.
You really can't, because if you don't know who is on the playing field, you can't possibly know what game you are actually playing.
Right, you might draft this brilliant defensive strategy only to realize you were playing offense against a totally different opponent.
Precisely. To prevent that, the framework requires you to conduct identification across two distinct dimensions.
Okay, what's dimension one?
Dimension one is straightforward. Who is directly involved? These are the people sitting at the table. The client, the opposing party, the immediate brokers.
That's the easy part.
Yeah. Dimension two is where the complexity lies. Who may be affected by the outcome?
The affected category, that is exactly where the landmines are buried.
Oh, absolutely.
Because these people aren't on the Zoom calls, they aren't copied on the email threads, but the very moment the outcome touches their financial or operational reality, they will suddenly insert themselves into the process.
Our minority shareholder from the intro is the perfect example of this. They weren't involved in the daily drafting of the asset purchase agreement, but the outcome of that agreement fundamentally affected their equity position.
And because they were ignored, they just weaponized their legal rights to derail the entire process.
Exactly.
But the theoretical concept of finding hidden stakeholders makes sense, but the practical application feels pretty daunting.
It does feel overwhelming at first.
Yeah, I mean, a lawyer isn't a private investigator. We can't just magically intuit who is hiding in the corporate woodwork. So here's where it gets really interesting. What's the actual toolkit for pulling these people into the light?
The methodology relies on structured, repeatable processes rather than just intuition. The source outlines 4 primary tools here. First, you implement structured intake questionnaires.
So not just a casual chat.
Right. You don't just sit in an initial consultation and ask the client, so what do you want to achieve? You ask them systematic, calibrated questions specifically engineered to uncover third-party entanglements.
Like what kind of questions?
Things like, who holds the debt? Are there legacy founders who retain veto power? Are there ongoing disputes with any key suppliers?
You interrogate the ecosystem, not just the immediate transaction.
Exactly. The second tool is a forensic review of existing corporate documents, and you are specifically hunting for consent rights, change of control triggers, and notification obligations.
This is a major shift in how you read a contract. Usually, a lawyer reviews a legacy contract looking for, liability exposure or indemnification gaps.
Right, checking for bad clauses.
But here, you are reading the fine print to see who legally has to be invited to the party.
That's a perfect way to put it.
If a legacy software license says, this license terminates upon a change of majority ownership unless prior written consent is given, that software vendor is suddenly a critical stakeholder.
And if that software is the absolute backbone of the target company's operations, that vendor essentially holds a veto over your entire M&A deal.
Wow. Okay, what's the third tool?
The third tool is the facilitated relationship conversation. This requires the lawyer to actually step out of the purely legal domain and ask commercial and political questions.
Political questions.
Yeah, you sit the executive team down and you map out their relational dynamics. Are there familial complications in the cap table? Is the local mayor highly invested in keeping this factory open? You are looking for political and relational gravity.
It's like asking, hey, who is the eccentric uncle who still owns 3% of the company and absolutely hates the current CEO?
Exactly. You need to know where the emotional friction is going to come from long before it actually sparks.
That makes total sense. And the fourth tool?
The final tool, which is particularly critical for complex or highly regulated matters, is a comprehensive scan of the regulatory landscape.
Right, looking at the government bodies.
Yes. You have to identify any municipal, state, or federal bodies that possess oversight authority. They might not care at all about the commercial terms of your deal, but if your transaction triggers a mandatory antitrust review, they completely control your timeline.
So step one is essentially casting a massive, indiscriminate net and pulling every possible entity onto the deck.
Yep, getting everyone out in the open.
But once you have this enormous list, you face a triage problem. I mean, you cannot practically give the same level of white glove attention to the regulatory review board that you give to a junior operations manager whose daily reporting structure might change slightly.
You'd never sleep if you tried to do that.
Right. So this brings us to step two. Analyse. We have to organize the chaos.
This is where the strategic triage actually happens, and it's done through the interest-influence matrix. You plot every identified entity on a two-axis grid.
Okay, walk me through the axis.
The vertical axis measures their level of influence over the legal outcome. Do they have the raw power to advance the matter, delay it, or just completely kill it?
Got it. And the horizontal axis.
The horizontal axis measures their level of interest in the matter. How deeply does this transaction or litigation affect them personally, financially, or operationally?
This matrix really is the core engine of the entire methodology. Let's spend some significant time exploring how a lawyer actually navigates these four quadrants.
Because miscategorizing someone here is fatal.
Yeah, it seems like it would lead to a massive misallocation of resources. Let's imagine we are handling a massive commercial real estate development. We are building a high-rise in a densely populated urban center. Quadrant 1 is high interest and high influence. Who lives in this quadrant?
These are your apex stakeholders. In your real estate scenario, this is your primary anchor tenant who is funding a large portion of the build and the primary lender providing the construction loan.
They care a lot and they have all the power.
Exactly. They have immense power to pull the funding, and they are deeply invested in the exact specifications of the building.
If we use a movie production analogy, these are your lead actors and your studio executives. If the lead actor walks off the set, production halts. If the studio freezes the budget, production halts.
That's spot on. The management strategy for Quadrant 1 is intense, active engagement. You cannot manage them passively through, monthly newsletters.
No, they need way more than that.
They require weekly alignment calls, inclusion in strategic pivot decisions, and proactive management of their specific anxieties. If a Quadrant 1 stakeholder is surprised by a development, you have fundamentally failed at your job.
Okay, moving to Quadrant 2. High influence, but lower interest. This quadrant feels like the most counterintuitive group to manage.
It really is.
They possess the power to destroy the project, but they don't fundamentally care about the project's success.
Going back to your real estate development, this is the municipal zoning board or the city permit office. The clerk processing your environmental impact study does not care about your architectural vision.
Or your projected return on investment.
Right. Their interest in your specific building is incredibly low, but their influence is absolute. If they deny the permit, you have a very expensive, empty dirt lot.
So my goal isn't to make the permit clerk fall in love with the building. My goal is simply to ensure they have absolutely zero administrative friction when they're processing my paperwork.
That is the exact distinction. The strategy here is to keep them satisfied and structurally informed. You do not bombard them with architectural updates.
They just get annoyed.
Yeah, you give them the precise compliance data they need exactly when they need it. The overarching danger in Quadrant 2 is waking a sleeping giant.
Waking a sleeping giant. I like that.
If you ignore their bureaucratic requirements, you suddenly force them to become highly interested in your project, and usually in a very punitive way. You want them to process the file and just go back to sleep.
Got it. Then we drop down to Quadrant 3. High interest, but lower influence. These stakeholders care deeply. They are highly affected by the outcome, but they lack the legal or structural leverage to actually stop the train.
In the real estate example, this might be the local neighborhood association. They are intensely interested because the construction will cause noise, traffic, and structural changes to their daily environment.
But legally, if you have your permits, they cannot unilaterally halt the bulldozers.
Exactly.
So if they don't have the legal power to stop me, the cynical lawyer response might be to completely ignore them and just save the billable hours. I mean, why spend time managing people who can't pull the plug?
Because influence isn't only measured in direct legal authority, it's also measured in friction and reputational damage.
Ah, the court of public opinion.
Exactly. If you ignore the neighborhood association, they might not be able to file an injunction, but they can organize protests, they can generate hostile media coverage, and they can pressure the local politicians.
Who sit in Quadrant 2.
Yes. They pressure those high-influence politicians to suddenly care about your project. The strategy for Quadrant 3 is to keep them informed and manage their expectations.
You hold the town halls?
Right. You send the weekly email updates about construction hours. You manage their anxiety so it doesn't metastasize into political pressure.
You are basically bleeding off the pressure before it turns into a larger problem.
Exactly.
Finally, we have Quadrant 4. Low interest and low influence.
These are the peripheral entities. Perhaps it's a vendor who supplies a very generic, easily replaceable material to the construction site. They don't have deep leverage, and a slight delay doesn't bankrupt them.
So what's the strategy there?
The strategy is simple monitoring. You keep them on the radar, require minimal active engagement, and simply watch to see if their status shifts.
But the source material emphasizes that analyzing stakeholders goes beyond just plotting them on a 2x2 grid. There is a qualitative risk assessment that has to happen right alongside the structural mapping.
The grid tells you how much to manage them, but the risk assessment tells you how to manage them.
That's a crucial difference.
It really is. You can have two stakeholders sitting directly next to each other in the high-interest, high-influence quadrant, but they require wildly different psychological approaches.
Because their motivations are different.
Exactly. You have to ask, are their commercial objectives aligned with our clients? Does this stakeholder have a history of highly litigious behavior?
Do they possess absolute blocking rights or just the ability to cause severe delays?
Right. Managing a powerful ally requires transparency. Managing a powerful adversary requires intense strategic containment.
Which flows perfectly into step 3 of the framework. Engage. We've identified them, we've analyzed their power dynamics, and now we have to actually talk to them.
But engagement in the ILLPM methodology isn't just sending a generic project kickoff email to a massive BCC list.
No, it's way more targeted than that.
Engagement is a continuous, highly calibrated communication architecture. It is directly informed by the analysis phase.
So what are the mechanics of that?
The mechanics involve setting up dedicated communication channels tailored to the specific stakeholder. For a Quadrant 1 heavy hitter, engagement means operationalizing the communication.
You don't just call them when you feel like it.
Never. You build a recurring mechanism directly into the matter plan. Every Thursday at 4 p.m., the lead partner has a 15-minute risk alignment briefing with the anchor investor. It becomes an immovable part of the legal infrastructure.
There's a psychological component to engagement mentioned in the text that I found fascinating. It talks about the absolute necessity of listening for unstated concerns.
Yes, because in legal negotiations, people rarely lead with their actual fears.
It is a fundamental truth of negotiation that the legal argument is often just a proxy for a commercial or emotional fear.
A stakeholder might spend 3 weeks aggressively litigating the exact wording of an indemnification clause. A traditional lawyer fights back on the legal merits of the clause.
Just going back and forth on the text.
Right. But a strategic project manager realizes the stakeholder doesn't actually care about the indemnity. Their unstated concern is a deep fear that the new corporate structure will strip them of their day-to-day operational autonomy.
So effective engagement means listening past the legal friction to diagnose the underlying anxiety.
Exactly. If you can diagnose that unstated fear, you can usually solve the problem without ever touching the contentious legal clause.
You solve the operational fear, and the legal objection magically vanishes.
It happens all the time.
But this brings up a massive structural tension. I mean, lawyers operate under incredibly strict professional conduct rules. We are bound by confidentiality, attorney-client privilege, and a duty of loyalty.
It's a very rigid ethical framework.
So how do you actively engage a vast, diverse web of stakeholders, many of whom might have competing or even adversarial interests, without breaching your ethical obligations and spilling privileged information?
That is the ultimate tightrope walk of legal project management. The tension between the need for operational transparency and the ethical mandate for confidentiality is precisely why a lot of lawyers just abandon stakeholder management altogether.
It just feels too risky to them.
It does, but the framework provides strict parameters here. Engagement does not equate to total transparency. You do not open the kimono to everyone.
You design your communication strategy around what you are ethically permitted to share.
Exactly. Sometimes the most effective engagement is purely receptive.
What do you mean by receptive?
You meet with a difficult stakeholder, you ask calibrated questions, you validate their concerns, and you absorb their intelligence without divulging a single privileged detail about your client's strategy.
So you are managing the relationship and keeping the temperature low while maintaining absolute ethical boundaries.
Yes. It's about managing the flow of the process, especially when you are dealing with parties whose interests only partially overlap with your clients.
Okay, so what does this all mean in practice? Let's synthesize this theory into a tangible tool. If you are an attorney staring down a complex new matter tomorrow morning, how do you actually materialize this framework?
You need a system. You can't just keep it in your head.
Exactly. I can't hold 50 different stakeholder profiles, their influence metrics, and their hidden psychological fears in my head while also trying to draft a 50-page contract. What is the physical artifact I am creating?
The artifact is the living stakeholder map. And the source is very prescriptive about exactly what this document must contain.
So you can build it in Excel, Airtable, or a dedicated legal project management software.
Yeah, the platform doesn't matter, but it must serve as the central nervous system for the matter. There are 8 non-negotiable columns you need to build.
Let's walk through the architecture of this spreadsheet. Columns 1 and 2 are the baseline identity markers, right?
Yes. Column 1 is the name and the role. Who are they and what is their official title? Column 2 defines their structural relationship to the matter.
So are they a primary party, a tangentially affected third party, an external regulator, or an internal corporate influencer?
Exactly. Then columns 3 and 4 translate our matrix.
Right. Column 3 captures their level of interest high, medium, or low. And column 4 captures their level of influence over the outcome high, medium, or low.
This instantly tells any attorney looking at the map where this person sits in the hierarchy of attention.
Now, column 5 is where it gets highly strategic. We aren't just locking names anymore.
Now, column 5 documents key interests and concerns. And crucially, a competent lawyer must populate this column with both the stated demands, what they are loudly asking for in emails, and the inferred, unstated concerns we just discussed.
If you only document what they say aloud, your map is dangerously incomplete.
It is. You have to analyze their commercial position to infer what they must secretly be terrified of losing.
That is such a pro tip. Column 6 follows that up with potential risks.
Right. If this stakeholder turns hostile, what is their specific mechanism of inflicting damage?
Can they veto the deal? Can they leak damaging information to the press? Can they delay the regulatory timeline?
You need to know exactly what weapon they are holding. Then column 7 dictates the engagement strategy.
This outlines the communication approach, the specific channels to be used, and the precise frequency.
It moves stakeholder management from a vague intention to a calendarized event.
And finally, column 8, which I think is the most important accountability mechanism on the entire map.
The accountable team member. Every single stakeholder must have a specific individual on the legal team assigned to manage that relationship.
Because if a powerful stakeholder is assigned to the whole team, they're basically assigned to nobody.
Exactly. When a crisis hits, you need to know exactly which attorney is responsible for picking up the phone and neutralizing the threat.
But building this incredible 8-column strategic masterpiece introduces a new vulnerability. The expert source issues a severe warning about what happens after the map is created.
Oh, yes. The fatal implementation mistake.
What is it?
The fatal mistake is treating the map as an onboarding checklist. A legal team will spend hours exhaustively building this matrix in week 1. They will admire how comprehensive it is, and then they will save it to the firm's shared drive and literally never open it again.
Out of sight, out of mind.
A map completed at the outset and buried in a digital drawer is only marginally more useful than having no map at all.
Because the terrain is constantly shifting. A legal matter is a living ecosystem. A stakeholder who starts out in quadrant 4 low interest, low influence might quietly accumulate leverage over 6 months.
Exactly. Suddenly, a minor vendor realizes they are the only supplier capable of meeting a new regulatory standard required by the merger.
And overnight, they teleport right into quadrant 1. If you aren't updating the map, you are navigating using obsolete geography.
The framework mandates that the map is a living document. It must be actively reviewed and updated at every significant milestone of the project or whenever a major external variable changes.
The map has to evolve at the exact same speed as the transaction itself.
Precisely.
Okay, we have the theoretical foundation. We have the 8-column tactical map. Now, the source material does something brilliant. It takes this framework and stress tests it across 3 highly distinct legal environments to prove its versatility. Let's dive into the first application context, mergers and acquisitions.
If there is a crucible that proves the absolute necessity of stakeholder management, it is M&A.
Oh, absolutely.
The source explicitly identifies M&A as the most stakeholder-intensive environment in modern legal practice.
Yeah.
The sheer density of competing interests packed into a single transaction is just staggering.
It is the ultimate crowded room. I mean, in a standard acquisition, you aren't just dealing with a buyer and a seller.
Not at all. You are managing the sellers and their battery of legal and financial advisors. You are managing the buyers and their respective teams.
You have the private equity backers or institutional financiers who are funding the debt.
And they operate on ruthless, immovable timelines. You have multiple layers of regulatory bodies, antitrust, foreign direct investment, environmental.
You have the target company's executive management team who are trying to secure their golden parachutes.
And on the flip side, you have the rank and file employees who are paralyzed by the fear of mass layoffs.
And lurking beneath all of those visible players are the hidden landmines. We already dissected the nightmare of the silent minority shareholder with blocking rights, but the source material flags other specific structural traps. Let's talk about the mechanics of tag-along rights.
Oh, tag-along rights are fascinating.
How does a failure to identify this stakeholder blow up a deal?
So a tag-along right is a contractual protection usually given to minority shareholders. It stipulates that if the majority shareholder sells their stake to a buyer, the minority shareholder has the legal right to tag along and force the buyer to purchase their shares at the exact same price and terms.
To use a metaphor, it's like trying to buy a single slice of pizza, but there is a hidden string attached to the rest of the pie. The moment you pull your slice, you are legally obligated to pay for the entire box.
That is exactly how it functions. Now imagine a buyer has meticulously secured financing to purchase a 60% controlling stake in a company. They have optimized their capital stack for that specific purchase price.
Right.
A week before closing, a group of minority shareholders holding the other 40% activate their tag-along rights.
Wow. Suddenly, the buyer is legally obligated to purchase 100% of the company.
Yes. Their financing collapses, the deal metrics are destroyed, and the acquisition implodes, all because the legal team failed to map the secondary shareholders as high-influence stakeholders.
And the other trap the source highlights involves counterparties with change of control termination rights.
This one is equally lethal. Imagine acquiring a logistics company because they have a highly lucrative, exclusive distribution contract with a global tech giant.
Okay, you run the financial models, the valuation is incredible, and you sign the deal.
Right. And 2 days after closing, the tech giant terminates the contract.
Just like that. Why?
Because buried in their vendor agreement was a standard clause stating that if the logistics company undergoes a change of control, the tech giant has the unilateral right to terminate the relationship.
So you just bought a hollow shell.
Exactly. The entire value of the asset you purchased just evaporated overnight because you didn't map the key customer as a stakeholder who required proactive engagement and consent prior to closing.
What's fascinating here is that this leads to one of the most profound paradigm shifts in the entire source text. It fundamentally redefines the purpose of due diligence.
It really does. Traditional legal training treats due diligence as an exercise in liability detection.
Right, junior lawyers are locked in a data room for weeks, just reading thousands of pages of contracts to ensure the company doesn't have pending lawsuits or toxic environmental liabilities.
But the ILPM framework argues that due diligence is actually a stakeholder identification exercise in disguise.
That reframing completely changes how an attorney reads a document. You aren't just looking for bad clauses. You are using the contracts as a sonar system to ping for hidden stakeholders who hold structural power over the deal.
A change of control clause isn't just a legal risk. It's a map pointing directly to a high-influence third party.
When you view due diligence through the lens of stakeholder management, it stops being a tedious administrative chore and becomes the most critical strategic intelligence gathering phase of the entire transaction.
It's a total game changer.
Okay, let's shift our focus to the second application context provided by the source. In-house corporate legal departments. This is a radically different environment.
Very different.
If you are outside counsel at a law firm, your stakeholder map is mostly external. But if you are an in-house counsel, your entire universe of stakeholders is inside the building with you. Your client is the business, but the business is a hydra with many conflicting heads.
The complexity of the in-house environment is that all of your stakeholders theoretically share the same ultimate goal, the success of the company. But their localized incentives, risk appetites, and operational timelines are violently misaligned.
Give me an example. Let's say the in-house legal team is negotiating a massive, enterprise-wide software procurement contract. The CFO is a primary internal stakeholder. What is their structural priority?
The CFO is focused entirely on capital efficiency. They care about the payment schedule, minimizing upfront costs, capping long-term financial liabilities, and ensuring the return on investment metrics look good for the quarterly board meeting.
Exactly. Their lens is purely financial. Now, pivot to the operations director, another critical stakeholder.
The operations director doesn't care about the quarterly board meeting. They care about implementation speed. They need the software deployed next month because the legacy system is crashing.
They want a contract that guarantees maximum uptime, rapid tech support, and zero operational friction.
Exactly. Then you map the chief compliance officer.
The compliance officer is basically the anti-operations director. They don't care about speed. They care exclusively about risk elimination.
Right. They want ironclad data privacy indemnities, exhaustive audit rights, and absolute adherence to international regulatory frameworks, even if negotiating those clauses delays the rollout by 6 months.
And presiding over all of this is this CEO, who might just want to sign the deal immediately because they sit on a philanthropic board with the software company's founder, and they prioritize the strategic executive relationship over the technical legal protections.
So the in-house lawyer is trapped right in the center of this crossfire. If they lack process discipline, they will default to the path of least resistance.
Which usually means they only manage the most senior stakeholder in the room. They just take their marching orders directly from the CEO.
The fatal danger of this tunnel vision is that the lawyer will negotiate and execute a contract that the CEO loves, but the CFO finds financially toxic. The operations team literally cannot implement without breaking their existing workflows, and the compliance officer flags as a massive data security violation.
The lawyer produced technically flawless legal work that the business fundamentally cannot use.
Yes, the contract is legally binding, but operationally catastrophic.
This is a massive failure of internal stakeholder management.
The ILLPM framework dictates that the in-house counsel must map these internal clients at the inception of the procurement process.
They must hold the facilitated alignment meetings to force the CFO and the compliance officer to reconcile their conflicting risk appetites before a single clause is drafted.
The lawyer's job isn't just to write the contract, it is to mediate the internal friction and establish a unified corporate position.
And that requires the lawyer to become a polyglot. You have to communicate in their respective languages.
Right. When you speak to the CFO, you translate legal risk into financial exposure. When you speak to operations, you translate regulatory requirements into workflow bottlenecks.
The stakeholder map gives you the blueprint for how to run those translations.
Let's move to the final context: litigation. This requires perhaps the biggest psychological pivot of all.
I have to admit, when I read the section on applying this to litigation, my initial reaction was extreme skepticism.
I think a lot of litigators feel that way.
Because litigation is inherently adversarial. It is formalized combat. You are suing someone, or they are suing you. The stakeholder map just looks like a giant bullseye painted on the opposing counsel and the defendant. Why do I need a complex matrix to tell me that the person I am suing is my primary stakeholder?
Because that assumption represents what the source calls the adversarial blind spot. Litigators are trained gladiators. They become so hypofixated on analyzing the enemy across the aisle, dissecting their arguments, and anticipating their motions that they become completely blind to the ecosystem surrounding the battlefield.
They dramatically underestimate the most consequential stakeholders in the entire process.
The ones ostensibly on their own side, or the supposedly neutral third parties?
The hidden allies. Because if you ignore them, they don't stay neutral for long. Who makes up this roster of ignored stakeholders in a complex commercial litigation?
First, you have the fact witnesses. A litigator might view a mid-level employee as just a vessel for delivering necessary testimony.
Just a tool for the case.
Right. But that employee is a human being who is likely terrified of being deposed, worried about their job security, and incredibly anxious about the process.
If their psychological and informational needs aren't actively managed, if they feel ignored or intimidated by their own legal team, their cooperation degrades, and your case falls apart on the stand.
That maps perfectly to the high-influence, high-interest quadrant. Their testimony can win or lose the case, and they are highly affected by the stress of the process.
Second, you have third parties exposed to discovery subpoenas. These are entities who are not parties to the lawsuit, but you desperately need their internal documents or emails to prove your case.
Litigators often just fire off aggressive subpoenas and expect compliance. But if you treat a third-party vendor like an enemy combatant, they will hire their own counsel, file motions to quash the subpoena, and stall your discovery process for 12 months.
A litigator utilizing stakeholder management recognizes that the third party is a high-influence entity who requires negotiated engagement, not just a legal demand.
But the source text singles out one specific entity in commercial litigation that is chronically undermanaged, and mismanaging them almost guarantees a catastrophic outcome for the law firm.
Ah, yes. The insurance carrier providing the defense coverage.
This dynamic is fascinating. Litigators, especially outside counsel, often treat the insurance claims adjuster as nothing more than a passive ATM.
The firm fights the legal battle, submits the monthly invoices, and expects the insurer to simply cut the checks.
But insurers are the furthest thing from passive. They are highly sophisticated financial institutions operating under intense regulatory and internal metric pressures.
Right. An insurance adjuster has to set a financial reserve on a case early in the life cycle. They need to predict what this litigation is going to cost.
Furthermore, in most commercial policies, the insurer holds absolute approval rights over any settlement offer.
So let's play out the failure of stakeholder management here. A litigator fights a bruising battle for 2 years, basically ignoring the insurer. 2 weeks before the trial begins, the litigator realizes they might lose and decides to settle.
They call the insurance adjuster and say, "We need you to authorize a $5 million settlement tomorrow." What happens?
The adjuster absolutely balks, because for 2 years they were kept in the dark, and their internal reserve for the case was set at $1 million.
Authorizing a $5 million payout at the 11th hour destroys their internal metrics and triggers massive internal audits.
Because the litigator failed to manage the insurer's expectations and provide early risk assessments, the insurer refuses to authorize the settlement, and the client is forced into a highly dangerous trial.
The solution is to identify the insurer on day one, plot them firmly in the high-influence quadrant, and build a rigorous, calendarized communication protocol.
You manage the adjuster's expectations month by month. If the risk profile of the case elevates, you brief them immediately so they can adjust their reserves incrementally.
When it is finally time to settle, the $5 million request isn't a shock. It's the logical conclusion of a 2-year conversation.
That is the essence of treating the insurer as a strategic partner rather than a hostile bank. We have covered an immense amount of theoretical and practical ground today.
We really have.
We've dismantled the traditional definition of a stakeholder. We've walked step by step through the Identify, Analyse, Engage framework. We've built the 8-column living map, and we've applied it to M&A, in-house dynamics, and litigation.
But we have to address the ultimate commercial reality.
Right. If I'm the managing partner of an AmLaw 100 firm or the general counsel of a Fortune 500 company, why am I mandating this specific ILPM methodology across my entire organization? What is the bottom line ROI on this process discipline?
It comes down to the fundamental difference between operating as a strategic asset versus operating as a liability manager.
Explain that.
The commercial case outlined in the source is unequivocal. Legal matters where a key stakeholder is identified late consistently generate massively higher legal costs, significantly extended timelines, and dramatically degraded client trust.
When you manage stakeholders reactively, you're basically selling your client chaos management.
And clients hate paying premium rates for chaos, especially when the chaos was structurally preventable.
Exactly. For in-house teams, the stakes are even higher regarding their internal reputation.
Yes. If an in-house department utilizes proactive mapping to surface operational risks and align internal factions before a major contract is signed, the business units view the legal department as a strategic asset. You are a partner facilitating growth.
But if you only surface the risks after the contract blows up, when the minority shareholder sends the cease and desist letter, the business views the legal department purely as a liability manager.
You are technically necessary to clean up the spill, but you are not seen as a strategic architect of the company's future.
There is a quote from the source text that perfectly crystallizes this entire deep dive. The difference isn't legal expertise, it's process discipline.
You can be the most brilliant technical draftsman in the world, but if you lack the process discipline to manage the ecosystem around your contract, your brilliance is commercially useless.
So for the listener who recognizes this gap in their own practice, how do they actually acquire this discipline? Because this isn't something you can just fake your way through by downloading a template.
You absolutely cannot wing it. The risk of implementing this poorly is almost worse than not doing it at all.
Right. So where do they go?
The exact methodology we've unpacked today, the deep mechanics of Identify, Analyse, Engage, is formally taught in the Applied Legal Project Management course.
Let's give you, the listener, the concrete details on this, because finding training that actually bridges the gap between theoretical project management and hardcore legal reality is incredibly rare.
The course features a dedicated, intensive module entirely focused on this specific 4-step framework. It is led by Nicolene Showman-Lowe, who is a master at translating these concepts into practical legal reality.
So it's not just generic theory.
No, the curriculum doesn't just offer generic project management theory designed for, software engineers.
Yeah.
It grounds every single concept in real-world transactional and litigation case studies.
So you are working through the exact types of M&A implosions and in-house crossfires we discussed today.
Precisely. You receive the calibrated mapping templates, fully optimized for the nuances of legal practice.
That's huge.
But arguably the most valuable aspect of the course is that it teaches the interpersonal dimension of the framework. It trains you on how to conduct those difficult, facilitated relationship conversations.
It gives you the psychological tools to manage apex stakeholders whose interests violently oppose each other and how to maintain operational control under intense adversarial pressure.
And from an accreditation standpoint, Pocket Advisor is Africa's only ILPM-accredited legal project management training provider.
This isn't just an internal certificate. When you graduate, you earn the internationally recognized LPP or LPA certifications.
You instantly join a global community of legal professionals across 63 countries who share this exact same strategic language and process discipline.
If you are ready to stop managing chaos and start engineering outcomes, you can access the free LPM 101 session and secure a massive R1000 discount on the full certification course by visiting pocketadvisor.co.zlegal-project management course.
It is a professional investment that literally pays for itself the very first time your living map allows you to neutralize a hidden stakeholder before they detonate your deal.
The ROI is undeniable. To wrap up our journey today, we started in the wreckage of an M&A disaster caused by a single unseen shareholder.
We utilized the ILPM framework to completely rebuild our understanding of who a stakeholder actually is.
We mastered the structural discipline of identifying the invisible, analyzing their power dynamics on the matrix, and engineering a tailored engagement strategy to manage their unstated fears.
And we proved that whether you are drafting a merger, mediating internal corporate warfare, or managing an insurance carrier during high-stakes litigation, process discipline is your ultimate leverage.
It fundamentally re-engineers how you approach the practice of law. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final paradigm-shifting thought to consider.
We discussed how, in the context of an acquisition, the true underlying purpose of legal due diligence is actually stakeholder identification in disguise. It's a mapping exercise hidden inside a compliance exercise.
So look at your own practice this week and ask yourself this. What other tedious, routine, highly administrative legal processes that you suffer through every single day are actually high-level project management exercises just waiting to be unlocked and weaponized by the right framework?
That reframes the entire daily grind. The mundane administrative tasks might actually hold the key to total strategic control.
It's a brilliant provocation. Thank you for walking through this incredibly dense, vital architecture with me. The next time you open a new file, draft a new contract, it's a step into a high-stakes negotiation. We hope you approach the room, not just as a lawyer arguing the law, but as a strategic architect managing the entire ecosystem. We will see you on the next deep dive.